Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the LMC channel. I'm your host, Liam. And do you remember the first video I ever did about the Sega Mega Drive Mini 2? And how I said that I wouldn't buy the console? Well, I'm sticking to that conclusion because who would buy a cheap piece of plastic for $130? So I laugh at those fools who bought it. So come on, join me! God damn it! Retro-style video game consoles are nothing of a new concept. Video game studios have been re-releasing more miniature versions of their original consoles as early as the start of the 21st century. Examples such as the At-Games Atari and Sega Flashback consoles with poor quality emulation and awful sound chips you see clogging up the store shelves every Black Friday at your local Bed Bath & Beyond. Your local Bed Bath & Beyond. They got the job done if you wanted a way to play these games in 2006. But since the beginning of 2020, there's been a major decline with mini consoles. The last one came out almost 3 years ago, and most gaming companies have given up on the mini market. However, I still love these mini consoles. Sure, it is true that you can play these games on your modern devices, but it is so cool for these companies to try and make an authentic way to play these games. So let's go back to a few years ago, when Nintendo released the NES Classic Edition in November 2016, and 1 year later, the Super Nintendo Classic in 2017. These two mini consoles created a renaissance to where all these video game companies started to re-release miniature versions of their classic consoles, packed in with games for their systems. Examples include the PlayStation Classic and the TurboGrafx-16 Mini. One of these companies to ride on the retro mini console craze was Sega. Now, Sega had already been re-releasing their most popular console, the Sega Genesis, in a smaller format with the help of At-Games. So, when Sega announced in 2018 that they would be re-releasing a Sega Genesis Mini with the help of At-Games, people got furious at Sega. So, Sega cut ties with At-Games and partnered up with M2, a company that is known for great emulation and also having previously worked on Genesis hardware before. So on September 19th, 2019, to coincide with the 30th anniversary of the Sega Genesis Mini came out with universal praise. Packed in with 38 games, the system reminded people of what made the Genesis so great, and with some of the best titles for the system, such as Sonic the Hedgehog 2, Streets of Rage 2, Gunstar Heroes, and many more. But they didn't stop there. They added bonus games to the system such as Super Fantasy Zone, Monster World 4, a brand new port of Darius, and finally the unreleased Genesis port of Tetris. Okay, so they're not the most exciting bonus games, but at least you could tell they put care into the product they were making. The team who made the Genesis Mini later went to work on the Game Gear Micro, a tiny version of Sega's only portable console that was only released in Japan. Later, in an interview with the head producer of the Genesis Mini, Yosuke Oganari, he stated that they were working on another retro console, and that it would take about 2 years to come out, stating that it would probably be the last mini console they would ever create. This got fans to speculate. I mean, Sega has a vastly rich history with all their gaming consoles. I mean, the next mini console could be anything. Just think, a Master System Mini, a Sega Saturn Mini, or even a Sega Dreamcast Mini. I can't wait that long! So 2 years came and went, and finally on June 3rd, 2022, it was announced that Sega's next mini console would be the freaking Sega Genesis again. Yosuke stated that originally Sega was considering making a Dreamcast or Saturn Mini, but due to high cost and a worldwide chip shortage, Sega didn't have the funds to produce any of their 3D consoles. So we were getting another Genesis Mini console. It's not like we have plenty of those already. However, it was around that time when I made my first video on the topic, and even though I could have done a lot better on that video. Today we are going to be talking about Sega's new release.
Oh my god, shut up.
I came to the conclusion that I was upset but excited at the same time for this Mega Drive Mini 2. Eventually a month went by and a North American version was announced as an Amazon exclusive, and $130, plus $30 shipping. Also, it would have a very limited release here, with Sega stating that they would only make about 1/10 compared to the original Mini. In August, the full library was announced, and a European version was confirmed, And finally, on October 27th, 2022, the Sega Genesis Mini 2 came out. There was no marketing over here in the States besides the 2 trailers shown off on Sega's YouTube channel. In Japan, the marketing was huge over there. They would have little presentations with Yosuke and his friends showing off every title for the system and all the dumb little accessories that came along with it, with every trailer announcing what games were on the console. Kinda like a Smash Bros. Reveal trailer, only less exciting. In America, however, it went something like this. Genesis Mini 2's been announced, here's like half of the lineup, 1 month later, here's the rest of the games. I mean, the only people who knew this thing was coming out were people like me, people who are obsessed with Sega. Heck, I even have friends who are big into gaming and they had no idea this mini system even existed, a week before the system's release. So yeah, I deserve some kind of a reward for keeping this system alive, Sega! So I've hyped this console long enough. Let's take a look at what might be the very last mini console based on a real video game system, the Sega Genesis Mini 2. Let's start off with the most important thing about the console, the box art. Here you can see they actually modeled the box off of the original 1993 box for the Genesis 2, which is pretty cool, all things considered. However, you wanna know something even cooler? BAM! I got an original Genesis 2 in the box! So let's take a look at it and compare the two. One thing you might know about the Mini 2's box is that it's really small and wide. However, on the other hand, the original box is 10 times the size of the Minis and a lot thinner too. Both boxes help display the games that you can play on these systems, both including that you can play Sega CD games. However, the original 2 shows off the actual games, while the Mini only shows off the box art of some of the games, as they pretty much can't fit everything on the back of the box like the Genesis Mini 1. Now let's take a look at what you get inside the box. Here, with the original box, you open it up and you got the original Genesis 2, 1 3-button controller, AV cables, and the enclosed instructions. Pretty much what any console came with in the 90s. With the Genesis Mini 2, you get the console, 1 6-button controller, an HDMI cable, a stick, and tucked away in the corner, a power brick. Again, the essentials for most mini consoles. Now you can see the difference between the original and Mini, and how it almost looks like a one-on-one comparison between the two. Front, back, top, bottom, sides, all look the same. However, there's one flaw you might know if you've been paying attention. The power button is a switch on the Mini, whereas originally it was a button. And I think it's because the American version of the console was an afterthought, so they just put the very same mold they had for the Japanese Mini, since the original Mega Drive Mini 2 had a power switch. This is unacceptable, and you'll be hearing from me, Sega! But it's not really a big deal, though. One positive I have to give the Mini 2 is the inclusion of the 6-button controller, which is really nice since this is the definitive Genesis controller. Not even Nintendo's selling the 6-button controller in America for their Switch Online service. Such a shame. When you turn on the original Genesis, a bright red light powers the system, indicating that it is on. Though, for the Mini, they just painted it orange underneath the power switch. Come on! Even the first Mini had a light. Sega, you cheap bastard! So yeah, I think that about wraps up the comparisons between the original and the Mini. Honestly, Sega did a really good job recreating the design of their console. And even though it's not 100% perfect, who really cares in the end? You open up the startup menu and it's a nice opening, with the music by Yozo Koshiro, as he rearranges a few Genesis songs that are in this collection, though I feel like the first Mini songs are better. Turning on the power to Sonic 1's Starlight Zone is a lot more memorable than Shining in the Darkness' Stormstrong Castle. I like how whenever I click on some of these games, they have different versions of them. Here, such as Sonic CD, it allows me to play either the US or Japanese soundtracks, or Phantasy Star 2, having an easy mode for the game. You can also switch the regions for these games, just like in the Mini 1. If you scan this QR code with your phone, this will allow you to read the instruction manuals for the original games. I even like how they made new manuals for the bonus games. And they even made one for how to hook up the system, even though you've probably already done that before. And I even like how they added Rolf and Nee from Phantasy Star 2 in the manual as these little cartoon pop-ups.
Oh, Nee, what are you doing? That thing's not a car, you silly goose. You sussy baka.
The Mini 2's menu is very similar to the first Mini, but there are a few new options. For one, there are a few new wallpapers you can play around with, which now actually rivals the Super Nintendo Mini's amount of wallpapers. I guess they learned from criticism. One thing I mentioned in my Mini 2 announcement video is the fact that you could switch between the sounds of the first and second models of the Genesis, since both models have different sound chips. Take a listen. For this video, I stuck with the Model 2 sound chip. You can now use the mode button, which is on top of the 6-button controller, to head to the save screen, but you can also change the amount of time you want to hold down the mode button, since some games actually use this mode button on the original Genesis. You can even plug in the 6-button controller into the original Genesis Mini and play the games with the definitive Sega Genesis controller. I think that's about it for the menu, so let's take a look at the actual reason why people bought this thing. Because we don't buy consoles for the looks, we buy them for the games! So let's boot up some games and see what's in store for us. There are so many great games to play here, and since I've already wasted so much time, I'll just go over a few and tell you if these games are good or not. There are over 40 games in the Genesis collection for people to play. Revenge of Shinobi is one of my favorite games for the console. With its action-based gameplay that forces you to master everything that comes your way, it's a real blast when you get good at it. Though I'm sad that they took away Spider-Man, Batman, and Godzilla out of this version. Outrun is still a fun arcade game to this very day, as you try to reach the checkpoint as fast as you can while great music plays in the background. Sonic 3D Blast is a game that I actually like where you save all the flickies from Dr. Robotnik. In my opinion, it's right up there with the classic 2D Sonic games. Alien Soldier is a tough-as-nails boss rush game where you die over and over again. But if you master the mechanics, oh man, is it a good time. Rystar, surprisingly, wasn't on the original Genesis Mini, is a fun platformer created by Sonic Team, which still hasn't gotten a sequel to this day. Phantasy Star 2 is an early RPG for the console, but still has a great story and fun boss battles. Shining Force 2 is another RPG for the console that is basically Sega's answer to Fire Emblem. I mean, see for yourself. Earthworm Jim 2 is a great sequel that overshadows its original counterpart. Lightning Force is a great but tough shooter. Populous is... why is this even on here? Crusader of Senti is a Zelda-like game where you collect animals and learn skills, and in my opinion is a very overhyped game. Super Hanon is a sequel to Hanon that blows that game right out of the water. Bonanza Bros is a fun arcade game where you break into places and steal all of their treasure. And finally, Virtual Racing. It's a very impressive game for the console, but it hasn't really aged all that well. Okay, so they're not really the best of the best for the system. But the Mini has a lot of hidden gems not that many people know about, so that kind of makes it worth the price. However, I can't say the same thing about the collection of Sega CD games, though. There's only 10 Sega CD games on here, and I know what you're gonna say. Actually, there's 12 Sega CD games on here in this collection, but we'll get to those two later. For now, it's only 10, okay? So, what are the 10 Sega CD games? Well, there's the 2 Echo the Dolphin games, which are superior to their Genesis counterpart because of the CD quality music, and Tides of Time has a cool CGI opening. Final Fight CD, also superior to its Super Nintendo counterpart, but also a little hard going in as one player. Mansion of Hidden Souls, an I Spy Spooky Mansion-like game where you explore this mansion and the whole thing feels like an experience. Night Trap, an awful game that's only here due to the amount of backlash it got in 1992. Robo Aleste, a shmup that is a sequel to Musha on the Genesis. Sewer Shark, an underrated classic for the Sega CD. Yes, I said it was a good game, since I enjoyed playing it. Shining Force CD, a cool remake of the 2 Game Gear games, and Sonic CD, which, come on, it's freaking Sonic CD. Sure, it's not my favorite classic Sonic game, but once you get into it, it's not that bad. So, that means no Luna, no Puffle Mel, no Road Adventure, no Killvine Squadron, no Vi, and No, why would he? Okay, that one you can leave out. But still, it's a little upsetting to see that most of the Sega CD heavy hitters aren't even on this console, even though the Sega CD is a main selling point. In fact, the Lunar and Powerful Mail games were originally going to be on this system. However, Victor Ireland didn't like how much he was getting paid for each title that was on the Mini, so he backed out of the deal. Or was it Sega who would win out of the deal? I don't know, but whichever side you take, it's still pretty sad to see that these games weren't on the system, since these games don't have re-releases on modern hardware. But fear not! The Sega Genesis Mini 2 has bonus games! 10 of which to be exact. I know, Rainbow Islands Extra, the Ninja Warrior, and Night Striker aren't considered bonus games. But due to the fact that these games were never released outside of Japan until now, I consider them bonus titles. So let's take a quick look at them, starting with Deviant P, a weird game that's similar to Pond, where you collect angels and knock off devils. It's a fun, challenging game that had me interested for a little while until I got frustrated. By the way, did you know this game was made by the one, the only, Takashi Iizuka, the head of Sonic Team today? If I ever met him, I would ask him one question. Why is the angel named Pete? More importantly, why is he naked? Anyways, Fantasy Zone is a fun Sega arcade game that was remade for this collection. You play as Opa Opa, and you have to stop your father from taking over all 8 worlds. Again, it's a fun arcade game that keeps you coming back. Night Striker is a Sega CD game that never left Japan until now, made by Taito. You pilot a flying car and shoot down the enemies coming at you. It's okay, and that's all I have to say. The Ninja Warriors is another game that never left Japan, and is also made by Taito, where you walk around as a cyborg ninja and slash down enemies. It's fun, and I would probably come back to it. Our final Taito game that never left Japan, I see a similarity, is Rainbow Islands Extra, where you play as the Bubble Bobble Kids, but instead of shooting bubbles out of your mouth, you shoot rainbows out of your hands. It's okay, I'd rather play Bubble Bobble or Parasol Islands instead. Space Harrier 2 is a remake of the Genesis launch title, but this version was built from the ground up, so they could actually allow sprite scaling, which was something that Genesis couldn't really do. It's a pretty impressive remake though the sprite flickering really ruins the experience, since the game has to keep its frame rate solid, which is something I commend M2 for doing. Though if you go into the options menu and press the right button on the D-pad, you can unlock an option to remove the sprite flickering. Are you freaking kidding me? This causes the sprite flickering to go away, but you are going to get a ton of lag for this, so pick your poison. Another thing I like about what M2 did was that they also remade the original Space Harrier for Genesis, and it's almost like the 32X version, though it has the same problems as Space Harrier 2. But I'll just say, if you're a Space Harrier fan, I hope you're happy. Splatter is an old Sega arcade game that's okay. It's a game where you play as the inspiration for the Chow in Sonic Adventure, I'm not joking, and you try to collect all the flowers before time runs out. It's okay. Next, Starmobile was a game that was cancelled for the Sega Genesis 30 years ago, but was finally finished for the Mini 2. It's an interesting puzzle game where you have to balance stars on top of this scale. Had a good time with it, but it's not really a selling point. Super Locomotive is another old Sega arcade game that looks more like a Master System game to me. Anyways, it's very difficult, where you play as this train and try to get all the oil while planes try to bomb you down. It's not that great, and it's really showed its age. And our final game is Versus Puyo Puyo Sun, a demake of the 1996 arcade game that's just Puyo Puyo, and that's about it. I'm not a big fan of Puyo Puyo, so if you like it, that's perfectly fine by me. Also, did you know that M2 wanted to put the story mode of this game in the Genesis version? But if they did, the whole system would have been delayed to March 2023, so Sega didn't want that. So you only got the Versus mode. And that's all the bonus titles. Honestly, they're not really that interesting. Most of them are very simple. Come on, are you really going to remember a game like Super Locomotive? What they could have made instead was a small little 2D classic Sonic game, but no. Just a bunch of forgettable arcade titles. But hey, at least it's better than anything At Games tried to do. And I think I basically talked about everything about the Sega Genesis Mini 2. So, what's my conclusion on it? Well, it's a disappointment. Sure, there's a lot of cool games on this device, and the fact that games such as Crusader of Senti, Revenge of Shinobi, Rystar, Outrun, Alien Soldier, and many more on this collection make it worth the price. But what's stopping Sega from re-releasing these games again on modern consoles in a few months? Heck, I can bet you that in a few months you're going to start seeing most of these games on the Nintendo Switch Online plus expansion pack. So if you want to wait, I don't have a problem with that since you're basically saving $130. I mentioned this before, but it seems to me that the whole retro mini console craze is over, and that the Genesis Mini 2 might be one of the last mini consoles. But I will say that the team behind the Mini 2 had a lot of passion behind the system, and they wanted to see the system succeed. Sadly, I don't think that's the case, and any further Sega mini console might have gotten the axe. Who knows? Maybe one day we'll get a Sega Saturn Mini or a Sega Dreamcast Mini, but for now, it's clear that Sega sees this console as nothing more than a collector's item. It's a nice gift for someone who grew up on the Sega Genesis, but again, what's stopping them from playing Genesis games on Switch or Xbox or PlayStation 5? But hey, at the end of the day, I liked what they tried to do with this mini system. Could have been so much better. So, if you found any interest in what I said, let me know what you think in the comments below.
Well, I delayed this video long enough, so let's put it out there. Oh, you're still here? I thought you got bored halfway during the video. Well, if you made it this far, all I gotta say is thank you so much for watching. This video took a long time and I really wanted to make it special, considering this is actually the very first thing I ever talked about on this channel. More content coming out in the future. Maybe something non-Sega related. I know the title of the video was very misleading, so without further ado, here's the real rant. This console cost me $130. Does Sega know about the economy right now? Also, where's the real Sega Mini I want? Like a Saturn or Dreamcast Mini. I'd rather throw this thing in a beehive and smear it with honey without playing a stupid game on this piece of shit. Thank you so much for watching. You gonna get the Sega Genesis Mini too? Well, my name is Liam. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to do the thing that every other YouTuber tells you to do. And I'll see you guys next time. Happy Valentine's Day!